The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame. So, you have a great idea for a personal project. It's a subject matter or an idea that you are really passionate about, and you know deep in your gut that you are meant to make it happen. But where do you start? How do you gain access? How can you manage to make the time to dedicate to a project when you are faced with trying to earn a living? What do you do with all those images once you're done? Well, all these questions have been asked by today's guests, Seth Joel and Charlie Holland, a husband and wife team that we interviewed way back in episode 68. They have been working on a personal project called Ranch Raised Kids, where they document the lives of children who are being raised in the world of ranching in Arizona. It's a unique take on the world of the modern cowboy and cowgirl, which leads us to rethink what we think we know about that world. It's also an opportunity to look into how a working professional produces a personal project. I've been really excited about the project since you first turned me on to it. The images are just amazing.
Thank you.
They're really, really beautiful. I love seeing the stuff that you guys have produced. But I thought it would be a good opportunity to sort of share the whole process, because I always talk to a lot of people who are doing personal projects, and oftentimes the conversations that arise from that are always one of the more interesting ones, because it's not just about people making interesting individual photographs. It's about having a passion about something, creating a series of images, and undoubtedly having a lot of obstacles in terms of the idea to fruition.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit you guys and to talk about the project. So why don't you tell us about how it all got started? What was the germ of the idea?
It started when we were shooting stock in Arizona, and we were introduced to a cowboy, a very good-looking cowboy with blue eyes, with three totally what we used to call cowboy cute kids. Okay. And we were we shot them in the Skull Valley Cafe, which is a good title for any cafe. And it really enjoyed the experience. But we met them completely by chance in Arizona about 7 years later. And they had gone from these, what I call cowboy cute, to one of them was roping and dragging calves to the fire at a branding, and the other two were helping with the medicines. So they were suddenly working cowboy. And it was a transformation that really took us by surprise, that within those 7 years they had grown up so much. And then they had invited us to the rodeo that they went to every year, which was called the Cowpunchers Reunion Rodeo in Arizona. And we'd said we were going to go for years, and we finally went the following year. And that's when the idea really grabbed us, because we realized that these three kids that we knew were not alone, that every kid we met was talented, good with horses, good ropers. They had cowboying skills, and they had the most impeccable manners. They were extremely well brought up, is the way your mother would have described them.
And it was yes, ma'am, and yes, sir.
And they also, we started talking to some of the other parents there, and we realized that they were being brought up on ranches that were 20 to 200 square miles in size. Therefore, they're being homeschooled. So it was the fact that these vast ranches still existed, were still being worked, the kids were still being trained to work them, they were being homeschooled, that made us wonder when we were driving home from the rodeo. We just said, well, what is it about being raised on a ranch that makes these kids so interesting and so accomplished? So we knocked around, wow, what's about ranch-raised kids? And then we talked, and we were able to put the ideas into enough shape to apply for a grant from Art Center.
Oh, so you guys applied for the grant even before you really actively started shooting.
Yes, because what it did was I was working at the Oratory at the time. So writing the grant proposal, I had the head of the library as my editor. So she was if she was interested, after all she knew and read about ranching and the West, then I knew that we were onto something interesting. So yes, but we knew, because of the amount of people we knew and the good feelings that we had about the community, we seemed to get along with the community, that we knew we could pull it off. Okay. But we needed to articulate the idea. And I think that's something about a personal project. You almost need to articulate the idea from the beginning. No one's going to give you any money unless you can articulate what you're doing there. Yes, so we got the grant. We were given the grant in November, and we didn't go back out into the field until March because we were preparing really, really carefully. We prepared a 5x7 glossy cards to hand out. And we were going to an event in March, and just 2 weeks before we went there, we sent a letter it was the Arizona Cattle Growers Association. We joined the Cattle Growers Association, which I never thought I'd have a card saying I was a member of the Arizona Cattle Growers Association. And we went to their weekend auction. And before we went, we notified the secretary of what we were going to be doing there, because we didn't want to show up there as random strangers. We knew any time we identified ourselves as random or entitled, that it was a mark against us. So we let the secretary of the association know who we were and what we were doing. And on our way to drive there, we got a call from her saying, I think this is a fantastic project and I want to put it on the cover of our magazine. We knew then that she had just given us a sort of good housekeeping seal of approval. So we introduced ourselves to everyone we possibly could, everyone who would look me in the eye at that Cattle Growers Association meeting and auction. And then the cover of the Cattle Growers magazine came out, and then it was time for the reunion rodeo again, where we could walk around with that magazine, say, oh, did you see us in the Cattle Growers? Okay. And suddenly we existed outside of just our big, strange people with cameras around our neck.
I was going to go back a little bit.
Okay.
Working on a personal project like this, there is no timeline to it. There's a beginning, but the opportunity to communicate with the ranch people could not be done by cell phone. It could not be done by email. It only could be done by actually going and meeting them face to face, as we call kind of boots on the ground.
Yeah.
That's what we did at this cattle auction. So we arrived at like 6 a.m. with all the other ranchers who were sort of showing off their horses and getting ready for the auction. And we just randomly introduced ourselves. They had no idea who we were. And we'd explain briefly about our project, and we'd show them a few picture cards and some examples of what we thought we might want to do with them. We spent hours just pressing the flesh, saying hello, explaining who we were.
And looking at horses.
Yeah.
Which you have an affinity for.
Yeah.
Well, that was the common interest, really, is having an interest in horses. Because cattle wasn't our world, but the horses were. And then we began to realize that we had a real connection with the land. And the land is what ranchers are really all about, being stewards of the land and looking after the water holes and looking after the pastures. And the cattle is a commodity. That's their living.
Right. Well, I want to go back even further than that because because I think when I think of some people going out and doing a personal project, they get an idea and they go out and actively shoot it, and they're really not thinking about what the overall theme or the idea. They go, "Oh, this would be interesting to photograph," and then sort of in the process of shooting and later editing, they kind of figure out what this project is about. And it seems that you guys had an opportunity to sort of figure that out in applying for the grant. And I'm really curious because you guys are working together. Could you talk a little bit about sort of hashing and refining what that idea was, not only for the grant, but how that helped you when it was time to meet these people and explain what you were doing?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. What was in the grant had a more of an emphasis on the sort of photographic history of the cowboy, because this was a grant to be provided by Art Center. So one of the things that was emphasized in the grant application was that still photographers had done the cowboy culture a disservice by idealizing, romanticizing, and de facto trivializing the cowboy culture. And that we wanted to go in there and shoot in color with pictures that reflected the here and now. That the Jay Dusard's book was called The Vanishing Breed, and it was done in 1982. Wow. And wow, we were there and they hadn't vanished. That was for me, that was a big, articulating all that was a big part of the grant process. There was also, I knew that the same thing was being done now. There's a couple of photographers, one in Colorado, one in Arizona, that are doing the same thing. It's black and white. It's timeless photography. That's what timeless in inverted commas. They intentionally leave out any reference to anything modern day, blah, 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 and have published books which just have these pictures, sometimes view camera pictures, without even any captions. And the community kind of resent that because they are not there it's not, I think the way we put it before is we didn't want to be the shoot and run photographers.
Right.
So then we don't need to tell the community that we're addressing what we think is an imbalance in how their culture is communicated by photographers. But what we told them was that we felt that we were so impressed by the strength of their culture that we felt that by showing the kids and by showing their skill and by showing how quickly they learned those skills, we were making a statement about not only how well they were bringing up their kids, how well they were educating their kids, but also that the cattle industry wasn't dead. So in terms of explaining it to the ranchers, it was that this culture is alive and well, and it will continue. And you're bringing up kids who are going to carry this forward.
So how did that inform the kinds of images that you made? Because you didn't necessarily want to, sort of repeat some of the mistakes that had been made in the past, but you still wanted to make images that were really visually appealing, but that explored maybe some facets of these people's lives, especially these young kids that wasn't really being visited.
Yes, I found that each picture built on the picture before it. So it was like a big story that we were beginning to tell about the importance of family in the ranching community. So I really found that the kids were accustomed to being around grown-ups. They always worked with their fathers. They worked with cowboys. They respected technique and standards in whatever jobs they were doing. So when we'd be introduced, they realized that we were coming from a long distance and that they were taking themselves quite seriously because this was about them. I was lucky that they would immediately give me as much time as I wanted and as much opportunity to allow them to tell their story while I was shooting. So they'd really own that particular photo shoot. So they'd take me into their rooms, or they'd take me to where they saddle up, or they'd take me to where they're raising their 4-H animals. And they'd share with me what their passion was on the ranch. And the opportunity to photograph them was just very comfortable, very relaxed.
So it wasn't the fact that they were so deferential to adults, typically in their interactions, wasn't an obstacle?
Wasn't an obstacle at all.
Did that surprise you?
Yeah, it did, because I've photographed children before, and they have very short attention spans, and they tend to be gimmicky and throw at you what they've seen on television or what the pop culture is dictating at the time.
No duck lips, please.
No duck lips. No, exactly.
Yeah, and we never had any kids photobombing the other kids either.
Yeah.
They were very respectful of the relationship between Seth and the child that was working, and they didn't try and mess it up. Very, very interesting.
So was this a relatively small community that you were photographing? Did everyone sort of know each other, or did you sort of have to sort of prime the pump when you went to different events or different areas?
Well, in the beginning, we didn't lift a camera up for 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah, we were just going out.
Well, from the grant to our first family visit was 6 months.
Meeting people and talking about our project. It was a real commitment on our part to network and to gain some trust and some sort of street cred. Mm-hmm. And there was one rancher in particular. Her name is Wendy Kimball. And Wendy rang us up on the way back from one of the cattle auctions, and she said she liked our project and she'd like to help us. So through Wendy, she made some introductions, and we followed through, and we started shooting. And then after those experiences, we'd get passed around. So, always someone would say, well, you should talk to the Westlakes, or you should talk to the Rogers. So we managed to get cell phone numbers, and texting seems to be the most efficient way to communicate. And just one thing has kind of led to the next.
Wow.
I'd like to go back to the photography bit that you asked, Seth, how the photography works. I should have known better. I thought that having been a photo editor, before we started shooting the project, I said we should go out and do some testing. How do we want this to look? Do we want these to be pose portraits? Do we want to have a light? Do we want to add a ring flash? Do we want to do this? Do we want that? And we went out to somewhere locally, and we had the ring flash, and we had the pop-up, and the wind came up. And there
was dust everywhere.
Yeah, and the pop-up was blowing down, and we shot, but it was like the best test we could have done because we didn't make that mistake. But I also realized I'd made a mistake even suggesting it, because there's one thing that as a photo editor, I always used to tell photographers that a good photo editor hires a photographer to take the picture they can't help but take. And what we didn't realize going into Ranch Raised was, of course, that was going to apply to Seth. We were going to be in very difficult situations. These situations are quite difficult socially, because we're coming into the family. There's a lot of talking going on.
Yeah.
We're going to their homes.
Some mothers are a little bit worried if they're talking to me in the kitchen and Seth's gone into the kid's bedroom because she wants to show him something. Mm-hmm. So there's a great deal of, there is no way we could have, and I think some of the other photographers before have taken the life out of the projects by using a view camera, by doing tintypes, by doing something where the photographic technique takes over the interaction.
Okay.
And I think Seth's very natural way of going and very natural way of shooting is what enables the interaction between the child and Seth to continue. The photography does not get in the way.
Can you give me an example of one of these shoots with one of these kids that really sort of epitomizes that whole concept where you felt like this is how I want to approach the project?
I would say one of the most unique experiences I've had on the ranch so far is photographing a young man named Holland. Holland was injured in a horse wreck when he was 5 years old. The doctors told him he'd never walk or speak again. And his mother was determined to make sure that she'd prove them wrong. So lo and behold, years later, because Holland's now 12, he's with the help of some aids, some physical aids like special straps and other things. He can get up in the saddle, and he can work at certain chores around the ranch. So we set up a photo session at the ranch to meet Holland, and I was expecting it to last maybe 10, 15 minutes before Holland would exhaust himself. And that would be the end of it. Whatever I get. Well, Holland and I just really connected. And I started to just ask him simple questions. I asked the mother to give me some examples of sign language so I could communicate with him. And after an hour and a half of shooting, from the barns to the horses to the round pen to the ATV, this young man exhausted me.
So your point is really that the reactive approach,
Yes.
your flexibility was what it made it possible to work with Talon. Setting up lights and asking Talon to stay somewhere was not going to give you a picture that
Right.
showed where he was at. He did that, and Seth followed him around and got the picture.
Yeah. That was a situation where I had no idea going in how long it was going to last and how Talon would react to me. There's been other experiences where I've been on the range with Shayla, who's 9 years old? Shayla Rogers, and we just really connected. And she, after asking her questions about what she likes to do on the range, what is her horse like, what does her father teach her, she just gives it up. I mean, she just owns the photo shoot because we'll spend 2.5 hours photographing. So it's just really an organic process. No matter where we go, it seems like the kids they really want to be a part of this project.
How simply were you working? Because, I mean, we talked about you weren't probably in all production, but I usually don't talk about equipment, but I'm really curious about how did you sort of pare things down when you were shooting?
Well, I really like an image to be as honest as possible. So I pared down my kit to just a 35 millimeter 1.4 prime lens, which I tend to shoot pretty much at the 1.4 to 2.8.
Which is one of the beautiful things, by the way, of those images, is how you use the depth of field. I mean, I just marvel at the beauty of it. So,
Thank you. It's using that lens that allows me to emphasize the areas of the picture that really mean the most to me. And lighting-wise, as natural as possible. These are natural environments, so it's a lot of daylight. And if I use a flash, it's just for a gentle fill to get underneath a cowboy hat. And that is usually adjusted about 2 stops below the ambient exposure. So that's how simple. I'm working as if I was a journalist in 1965 with a handheld Leica and Tri-X film.
And getting close. That demands that you're physically very in the action.
Always in close, which allows me to communicate with them. And that creates a bond.
And almost get killed occasionally.
There are times.
Well, you got to tell me about that.
I know, you're at roundups.
I'll tell this story because he was the one who had the camera fixed to his eyes. There was a roundup, and so there was a pen and the branding was going on, and there's a big branding fire. And someone was on a wild horse, a horse that went wild. And Seth was photographing, and they dragged very close to Seth, and then the horse started rearing up. And the only thing the rider could do, because Seth was 6 feet one side, he had to bash the horse into the fence to make sure the horse took its head away from Seth, and Seth was watching through his lens and took the picture, and then suddenly realized that the horse was coming down and backed off, and of course fell down.
In the process, within inches of the big fire that they used to warm the branding irons.
Yeah, so it was pretty hairy, but the guy was really in control of the horse, and everyone just laughed at Seth. They thought it was hysterical. He ended up on his back in the dirt.
Well, and the ranchers, they said to me, well, we have to look after you, not the 4-year-old child that you're photographing,
I got the same thing, not to that extent, but when I was photographing at the Santa Anita racetrack, I was focusing and I was getting closer and closer, and they were like, back up. Because the horse could kick me at any time, and I was completely oblivious. You talk about how big these ranches are, but I think most of us just lack any sort of context in terms of how big these places are. Tell us how you experienced that and how you tried to convey that, some essence of that in some of the photographs.
Well, it's a wow factor of 10. When you drive up a 20-mile dirt track to get to the camp where the rancher's living, which is also the house, the wow factor is just incredible. It's like an ocean of rangeland.
But it's so big, it is difficult to capture in a frame because of the notion. It's not necessarily a picture we have wanted to take, which is the child lost in the landscape. I suspect there's a couple of pictures that were taken on the CV ranch where it was very beautiful weather, and there were a couple of long shots, but because the book, we primarily designed it in our heads as the kids speaking, and we've limited ourselves sort of to one picture of the kid, just as some sort of construction, then very far views are quite difficult to incorporate. So there's only been a few pictures of the vast what's-its, and it's difficult to sum that up because it's almost unbelievable when you're. This is how they give directions. They go up the road, and this is a 2-lane highway, and then after the power lines, take a left there, and then after the 3rd cattle grid, you'll go over the railroad tracks, and then wait till you come to the W, to the V, and then take the right. Just make sure you get the right. And that's all the directions you get for 18 miles of dirt road.
Oh, wow.
We always say when we were given those directions, we felt that we'd really arrived because we were being treated like a kid would be treated. A kid would be given those directions sort of like that and expected to find their way. And so when we're given directions like that, we just go, fine. But that's 18 miles off the road. That's how how intense it is. And sometimes we'll stop and take pictures for ourselves, but I don't know how we'll ever be able to incorporate that vastness into a book that's focused on the kids.
But
it's a good question.
There are a few elements that help to share to the viewer the vastness of these ranches. Some of it has to do with the great big skies.
Yeah.
On the Lazy Bee Ranch, which was Sandra Day O'Connor's birthplace and where she grew up. And it's right on the border of New Mexico and Arizona. The skies are just the biggest skies I've ever seen in my life. The cloud formations are painterly. It's phenomenal. And in a photograph, it really captures that. The wind in a child's hair across their face, the way they dress, the dirt around their eyes because the dust is always blowing. Those are the things that really kind of capture, to me, what the landscape, the rough, rugged landscape, is really like.
One of the big things about the changing face of sort of the American West is the commercialization of, food. And I think part of the impression is that these family-owned farms and ranches are quickly sort of disappearing and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering what you've gotten in sense of the kids' perceptions of the sort of legacy they're inheriting, considering the industrialization of ranching and beef and all that holds for their future. Do you get a sense
I get a sense of the determination. They are determined to be very much like their parents. Their parents are their main role models, and the parents are determined to succeed in a really changing environment now in terms of the way cattle are auctioned off and the way the rangeland is regulated and leased out. These kids are learning everything there is to know about ranches and ranching by their parents. And that's one of the things that I really identified with when I got involved with this project, which was that I was mentored by my father, who taught me about photography, and he taught me technique, and he taught me the way to examine pictures and to read pictures. And the passion that he had, I inherited it. And I'm watching the kids, the ranch kids, experience the same thing I did as a child. They're being mentored by their parents. Their techniques, they learn how to take care of the rangeland, the ranch land. They're even taught how to read the color of the manure from the cattle to see how the feed is operating on their systems. It's like darkroom work for me.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing where it's time and temperature and then improvisation. But it's your final eye, it's the judgment call you make, which is the difference between a good print and a great print.
And this
I have a slightly different, if you don't...
No, go ahead.
A slightly different take on it, because I think something you just said is kind of one of the misconceptions. A lot of these ranches, the Babbitt Ranches is 700,000 acres, and it's been owned by a corporation since 1890. So there is a lot of corporate farming. A lot of the families I made the same assumption that the families that we would meet would be the owners of the land. They're not.
Okay.
They're sometimes on the Lazy Bee, that's owned by a corporation based in Los Angeles now, but we photographed the cow boss and his kids, the cow boss being a very specific role. And on the other ranches, yes, they've been sometimes the ranch manager for that ranch and another ranch, because the company owns 14 ranches. 3 in Colorado, 9 in Arizona, 2 in New Mexico. So it's it's an industry. This is not the family farm.
Okay.
There are some of them are owned by very rich families, and there will be no problem in the succession. Others, the tightest family that we know who own the most amount of land, and they own about 132,000 acres. They have 6 boys. They are not going to die until each one of those boys has his own ranch. So, and I swear, if John says that, John will not die until each one. He will be hanging on with his last breath while the last piece of paper is signed. And those boys want nothing. They all work together, and they want nothing other than to continue this, because they know by working together they can all have their own place.
No, thank you for that, because I had no idea.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It was a real eye opener for me. So the ranch raised kids is kids that are being raised in a culture, not kids that are being raised on family owned ranches.
Okay.
And also the difference is also that someone might own 22 acres but lease 100,000 acres of BLM land, or some own a huge amount of land, but most own a smaller amount of land and have leases on state and national land, and that's what compromises the ranch.
Did that complicate in terms of what you were able to do on the farm?
No, not at all. Not at all. These leases are really just a very important part of every ranch everywhere in the country. But the standards, whether it was a rancher who owned or whether he was managing a ranch, the standards were the same. Mm-hmm. There was this uncompromising approach to doing things according to the way they felt it should be done. So the water, the feed, the rangeland was carefully managed, and it didn't matter whether or not it was an owner or a ranch manager. It was remarkable to see that. It was also remarkable to learn about the job boards that the community has for cowboys, that during the roundup periods in the spring when they gather the cattle and they sift through and sort the young calves for branding, they actually hire cowboys, and cowboys from all over the country are looking at these job boards, and it's really extraordinary. So as soon as I learned how to rope,
I told Seth he was starting about 55 years too late on the learning to rope business.
Do you see much in terms of ethnic diversity amongst the community there?
No, there are some in Arizona. I would say it's mainly white, Caucasian. And there are some, the way that the Navajo, because we're limited really to Arizona experience now, the Navajo and the Apache, the way they organize their farms, it's a much more of a communal farming. It's like a tribally owned. Some Navajo run some sheep. But they're not, and there are some Navajo and Apache ranches that are now joined together to be part of what they call the Native American beef. And what it's come about because someone has committed to buying their beef, in order to which they have to raise standards. So there's a small amount. I can only locate about 10 ranches, but we haven't broken into that community yet.
We're close.
Yeah.
We have reached out to a few people that know people.
Yeah. So we've got an introduction into a couple of farms, and then there are people that still have cattle themselves of a Hispanic with a Hispanic background, and there was a couple of very, very prominent ranchers, one of whom passed away, the Gonzalez, last year and then 2 years ago. And so there's a very few, but mainly it's white.
It's Irish, German.
Coming down from Wyoming, in from Texas.
Okay.
And we've spoken, since it's a generational thing, that's something which really was exciting to discover, sitting with ranchers whose go back 6 generations. just post-Civil War. And their story of coming over from Scotland, gold rush, hitting his strike, ranching, and then family continuing the ranching.
It's very much not been a focus, and I've tried to not make it a prerequisite. People of our interest in a family. I don't really. It will be a note about the kid, but the interesting thing to us is whether or not that kid is going to ranch, or whether that kid is planning to be a vet, or that kid is already taking a rodeo scholarship to a university in Texas. I think the thing that's underestimated about the ranching community is the degree to which they're educated, because you think, oh, they grow up on the ranch, they stay on the ranch. Well, they're studying range management, and it really came home to us when we were at the cattle auction. We met an 84-year-old man who is one of the leading breeders of a certain type of cattle, and he had 2 MAs. He got those MAs in the 40s and 50s. The King Ranch, probably the most famous ranch in Texas, he made sure that his first son got a law degree. They are they would love, each one of them, to have someone who had a law degree and specialized in water rights. Each one of those families would like one of those kids, you know.
So you hear a lot of talk about water rights, though, when you're down there.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So how long have you been working on this project now?
This is our second year.
We got the grant in 2015, and we started shooting 2016.
And this year is, we hope to finish it this year. We plan on renting a house in Wilcox, which is in southern Arizona, in September through January, to really wrap this project up, because driving back and forth from LA has become really tiresome.
I bet.
We've listened to a lot of Audible books, and the one recently we adored was Sandra Day O'Connor's book, because she narrates it and talks about the Lazy Bee Ranch, which we had just come from. But we hope to finish up this year, and then, you know, we're exploring. We've been invited to contribute 4 images to an exhibition that's being mounted at the Phippen Museum in Prescott, Arizona. And that opens September 3rd and will run through January 23rd. We're hoping to exhibit at the Wickenburg Museum, Charlie. What is the
Desert
name?
Caballeros Museum in Wickenburg.
Yes, we've talked to them about one family show there.
The key, though, I think, is that how do we get this project out of the community? How do we get it into? We approached this, you know, like we said, we should have T-shirts made which said, "You're not from around here, are you?" Because that's what people say to us. And someone looked me straight in the face.
Especially with your accent.
Yeah. And someone looked me in the face and said, "You don't need the T-shirt." So I'm like, okay, right. And then but the point is that we're coming at it as civilians. And in some ways, we want to communicate everything that we didn't know. We didn't know. Every time we go out, we're humbled again because there was some other stupid thing we didn't realize, thing we didn't know. So if there is to be any writing, it's not to be a glorification of the heritage with all the families things. It's to be, again, the here and now and things that people, the civilians, as we refer to ourselves, don't know. So get it. But now our challenge, and back to the personal project thing, is how do we get from here? How do we get from this shooting to communicating with the civilians, the people in the community like us? We know that. We've had press within the community. How do we get it the next stage? And the marketing and the development of the marketing is something, as you may know, I teach at Art Center. And I'm extremely humbled to say I really am finding it immensely hard I have an idea of how I would like it to go, but Seth and I both realized that we have to get someone to help us.
Yeah. Because the idea is just to crystallize it, is that, you know, you've produced this body of work which has a built-in audience. But the challenge is in terms of being able to market it, say, as a book. Any publisher is going to ask, well, who's interested in this book?
Yeah.
And if you can't sort of convince someone that outside of this area in Arizona that there's a hunger for this, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
But in some ways, my feeling is that it's not. My personal ambition has never been to have a book in Barnes & Noble. That's not a lot of photographers. I want to see it in print. I want it to be a book. I really would. I would be very happy if an organization or a corporation would take it on and publish it because they were proud of the work that was in it and they felt that the work that was in it reflected their values. Because I think it does just the statement, the verbal statement that this is the next generation and these are interesting and astounding people. Our pictures Seth doesn't photograph people in a way that they look very ambiguous. Seth has a very happy attitude to life. If the photograph reflects the photographer's point of view, Seth's point of view about life is that it's going to be okay. And essentially that's what's going to come through in the pictures. However much I edit in the funky ones or the off moments or this and that and the other, it will always be, he's the photographer, it'll always be, his vision will be reflected, and it's positive and upbeat, and it shows the value of family, and it shows the value of working the land, it shows these people are accessible. So I would love to be sponsored for a publication by someone who needs the PR, maybe Wells Fargo, I don't know. But really, also, as a teacher, what I would say to a student who had this body of work is, how can you make someone want it? How does this translate into someone coming to you and saying, we want to shoot 10 potato farmers in Washington State? And us being able to know that Seth would take naturalistic, genuine, moving portraits of those people. So I'd like it to not only become, I'd like to be able to use it as a ticket to generate further assignments of the kind of photography.
Yeah, because that's something I wanted to get back to, because the grant we talked about earlier may have been initial sort of seed funding to get things started.
That's all it was.
But a large part of it was coming out of your pocket.
Yeah.
So
We're
in terms
self-producing this.
Yeah. So it's like you have to think about, okay, how much time do we dedicate to this? Because we still have to earn a living.
Yeah. It's a shame, but we still have to earn a living.
So talk a little bit about that, because you still have not seen sort of the end, the culmination of this yet. But talk about, practically speaking, okay, we want to go down there, we want to make these great photographs, but, how do we sort of figure out what's financially viable, and possibly how do you use this work to get yourself other work that's like this?
Well, there's nothing like energy creates more energy. The amortizing a project is an organic thing. It's a talking point which becomes a real passionate process that we're working on, that I'll share with clients. I'll share on my website. It becomes part of who I am, and it attracts, it creates a certain energy.
However, I want to take it beyond the organic, turn it into the more carefully constructed approach. And that's what we're finding really hard. We've just started speaking to someone who has been a brand development and a marketing person. She started at Nike. She's had a number of other clients. She's working with a couple of our artist friends, and she happened to be ranch raised. She is very, very keen. And she will add a level of professionalism to the things that we knew we had to do, but maybe didn't do quite right. So we put together a very nice website. But suddenly she points out, well, remember, the About You page shouldn't really be about you. It's about what you can do for someone else. What do you represent? Not where were you educated? So it's like, we have a lot to learn and a lot of guidance to take. But back to the earning thing. We made a rule about a year ago, which was even if we have a trip planned to Arizona, if a job comes up, the trip gets cancelled. The paid work always has to take priority. And now we're at the stage where we have to throw money into our own pot to make sure that this gets finished. Because when we have a body of work of 50 kids and I have all the interviews, then we can do something, even if it's only to make the second most expensive visiting card we ever made, which was the first volume. Actually, it would be more expensive because it would be 80 pages. Even if I have to do that out of my own pocket, I will do that to make sure that the people that played with us have a finished product in their hand. I can't go back to the places we've been and said, oh, we're still trying to find a publisher or whatever. Mm-hmm. If it costs me $2,000 to get it into their hands to say thank you, I will do that.
Yeah.
But after that, after we fulfilled our obligation to them, someone said, this is the mother's book.
That's good.
Right?
Good
and if we have to pay to produce the mother's book, then I will feel free to license the photography to someone who wants to lay it out differently, who wants to play with it, who wants the additional pictures, whose vision is different from mine. This is laid out exactly as we wanted it laid out. I would do something slightly, and I would like to see it once laid out, even if I have to pay for that, because in my lifetime, this might be the project that I'm most proud of in 10 years. So that's what we'll do. But what Seth was saying, so we have clients. We told one of our wealth management clients what we were doing. Last time we were at her office, we left her a copy of the book. She rang us. She sent us an email. She said, wonderful, I'm so pleased to see it. 5 days later, we get a call from another wealth management company. Oh, you were just recommended to us by. Mm-hmm. So somehow she is flattered that even though we're taking her corporate headshots for her, we exist as artists in our own right. She likes that, and she'll second that. So when she recommended us to someone else.
That's awesome.
So they just need that to happen like 10 times a month, it'll be fine.
But this becomes a passionate project for us. We are constantly looking to grow the relationship that we have with Ranch Raised Kids to publishers, galleries, marketing people. And to give you an example, we just signed a deal with RFD TV where they are airing a photo of the day.
I saw that clip, yeah.
And every day, one of our pictures is up on the monitor, and the announcer gives a credit to Seth and Charlie and their tribute to the ranch kids they've met on these big rugged ranches. And that in itself is all part of the growth process for us, taking it to the outside world.
I know, Seth and I have had a sort of philosophy: nothing happens unless you leave the house. So, we stick by it. And if we have to pay for another 3 months of shooting, I don't mind. Nothing will happen unless we move forward.
Absolutely. This is the kind of project that you cannot spend your time emailing people and hoping to move it forward that way. You have to go out and meet people in the old way, just boots on the ground, explain to them, show that you're serious, no matter whether you're on the ranch or you're in New York trying to sell it to an editor.
That's great. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend a photographer for our listeners to discover and explore on their own. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Well, Charlie.
Let me go first. Lucas Foglia, Foglia, had done 2 or 3 years ago, did a book called Front Country. And I have found that he spent between 2006 and 2013, he spent time in the West. And he took pictures, and he did it the opposite way around to us. He took pictures and he didn't know where it would end, but he was struck at the coexistence of the mining community and the cowboy community. And his book, Front Country, starts with bucolic cowboy pictures, and it gets very real, and it ends with the mining. And he doesn't judge. He's not like the usual cowboy photographer. He doesn't judge whether the cowboys are better than the mines. He's just say, here is, this is. So I'd recommend that.
Well, as you can imagine, because of Ranch Raised Kids, I've really tried to grow our social media presence. So on Facebook, I've reached out to not only the photo community, but the ranching community. And I've been following a photographer that I used to follow in New York during my commercial days there, a guy named Eric Meola.
Oh, Eric, yeah.
And we all know him. Mm-hmm. He's been around a long time. It's great work. But he's been doing a series of the effect that the weather has on the plains in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and his imagery of tornadoes and strange weather patterns are just the most stunning pictures I've seen in a long, long time. And he does a great written description of what he's experiencing and what he's seen on these journeys he's made. And it's clearly a personal project. It's probably something that's always interested him, the weather. And he approaches it in his amazing style of color and graphic shape and composition. So I follow him on Facebook with great pleasure. Whenever he posts a picture, and it's usually once a week, if not more, it's really, really fabulous.
Oh, I look forward to seeing both of these people's work. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming by and talking with me.
Well,
it's always a
thank
pleasure.
you, Baronex. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks again for joining me, and thanks again to Seth and Charlie. You can find out more about them and their work by visiting sethjoel.com. And to find out more about this personal project, go to ranchraisedphoto.com. Thank you for your continued support of The Candid Frame. If you haven't already, please take the time today to write a review in the iTunes Store. Your ratings and comments help people to discover great conversations like the one you heard today. Thanks to Fargo ND for his 5-star review. You can also support the show by making a monthly contribution through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or you'll find a link in the show notes and the Candid Frame website. Or if you just want to make a one-time contribution to the show, you can do so via PayPal by clicking on the donate button on the Candid Frame website or the show notes. Thanks to Unframed for the recent contribution. It's really helpful. Thank you. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS, Android, and Windows. It's the fastest and most convenient way to hear and save any of the great interviews we present here at TCF. Links for each can be found in the show notes and the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor. You can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @eBodyNX. And this is eBodyNX, and this is The Candid Frame.